Across the world, democracy is on a decline.
Authoritarianism is on the rise.
Global freedom has eroded for the 18th consecutive year.
Audrey Tang, what is your greatest hope for democracy across the globe?
That people see democracy as a social technology, something that people can construct together, that they can improve in the here and now. We can code up political systems.
The Sunflower Movement was a real turning point for Taiwan's democracy.
When the Sunflower Movement happened, I said to my colleague, I have to leave now. Democracy needs me. I brought a very long cable for internet connection. I live streamed through Twitter. Everybody saw it is possible for democracy to evolve, to come up with novel policies simply by asking the people, what should we do together? I was born with a heart defect, and one day I just fainted. I woke up in a hospital, and they told me the hole in my heart has grown. I could die. This awareness that everything can be reset tomorrow reminds me of Taiwanese democracy. We can't lose our democracy just with a couple missiles.
I think there's a lot that the world can learn from Taiwan. The US is running on a 250-year-old operating system. There is a strong desire to move beyond this and properly rethink from first principles. What would democracy in the 21st century actually look like?
We can make the government more open to the public. It'll be easier for people to access the data, to analyze it, transparency.
Audrey has created the opportunity to make Taiwan the most exciting constitutional democracy in the world.
I think it's a very critical moment. China really wants to invade Taiwan.
You're sitting on a place that is the flashpoint if there's going to be World War III. And yet there's calm in the eye of the hurricane. And that calm, I think, emanates from all that Audrey's done.
We can become co-creators of our democratic system, reconfiguring society in a way that is more transparent, more inclusive, more fair.
Good morning.
Morning.
We've had a day of conversations together at this point, and we started yesterday really bringing out some of the darkest challenges that people are facing around the globe right now. And one of the things, Audrey, that I've been so impressed and struck by your approach is that you don't shy away from a focus on those challenges. What are you making of the changes in the world in 2025?
Yeah, so more than a decade ago, as you saw in the trailer, Taiwan was facing a very dark hour. Our approval rate in the President Ma Ying-jeou administration was around 9%, not very high. In a country with 24 million people, that means anything the president says, 20 million people against him. But the people against him were very fractured, like super polarized at a peak of polarization. And the polarization attacks from our not so friendly neighbor has been increasing day by day. And so when we took the matter to our own hands, when we occupied the parliament peacefully, I think we're confronting not just as protesters, but rather as demonstrators. Instead of against something, we're showing that maybe we can confront this darkest hour just by listening to each other. Because in a sense, people go to polarization because they don't have the real thing, which is being heard and hearing each other. So they go to the next best thing, the ersatz thing, which is there's a bad world out there and somebody will defend us, right? And so by building the real thing, the hope is that we can bridge across the differences and heal polarization. And I think that is the main takeaway from our experience of a decade of bridge building in Taiwan. I think it does apply to this year as well.
You've been in conversation with people that I think at first blush, many of the people in this audience, maybe people finding this video online, wouldn't agree, would have the same ideas about democracy or the same ideas about politics. Mm-hmm. And yet, Audrey, something that I so admire about you is that you believe in this radical act of empowering people to be heard.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So when I related the story of the 20 or so civil society organizations occupying the parliament's different corners, holding citizens' assemblies with 500,000 people on the street and many more online, I think that is a story that resonates across the different political aisles. A month or so ago, I was on a live stream with Laura Loomer, and she...
And for those in the audience who don't know who Laura Loomer is?
She's a quite famous influencer that came up, I think, was popularizing the line, and I quote, "They're eating our pets, they're cats and dogs," and I quote, unquote. And so she and her 60,000 live streaming audience on Rumble and X were very interested, and she wanted initially to bond, like, you occupy your parliament, we did ours too. What do you make
on
of
January
it?
6th. Yeah.
Yes, and so I think one part of bridge making is to find this uncommon ground. And the uncommon ground here is that in Taiwan, because of our martial law history, I was born under martial law, and we had no freedom of speech back then. So when we countered the authoritarian threats, we always insisted on more speech and bridging speech and contextualized speech instead of censorship, because nobody wants to go back to the martial law. So that's maybe the only thing that can be built as an uncommon ground. But basically, by beginning with this line, I think over the course of 1 hour or so of live streaming, the MAGA right, the people watching the live stream, was won over to the platform of essentially, again, closing the loop by listening broadly instead of broadcasting, broad listening, and how that can heal the divide. So I do think that balancing is important. Holding up the different sides and have a real dialogue is important, but even more important is not to let the imagined polarization disrupt the ability for us to have such bridging conversations.
That's right. So these bridging conversations are, in some ways, the keys for unlocking resilient democracies.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it can be as simple as a daily flower.
So there's knowing laughter in the room. I now almost compulsively post a flower picture on Facebook. You know, I'm a tech critic by profession, and I have not given up on building a community on Facebook. So this started during the lockdowns in 2020, and it just celebrated its 5-year anniversary, and it's completely changed my conversation. So I am in daily conversations with people who vote very differently from how I do, who have very different lives from the one I lead now. And we share, sometimes it's only, that's a beautiful flower, right? Sometimes that's the only thing we can say that we have in common. We certainly didn't, you know, we don't vote the same way, we don't have the same views about the world, but I've not given up those ideas about conversation. And that's one of the reasons why I think the sunflower connection is telling. Like flowers do a thing. But it's also, I mean, to come back to this kind of mode of radical listening, and yesterday we heard from Zizi Papakuritsi, who's done a lot of work on what online platforms have done to us. You know, what algorithmic amplification has done has incentivized the highly charged, highly emotional, deeply effective responses that we have to each other. that's very different from a bridging project.
Indeed, in 2014, when we organized the Sunflower Movement online, at the time, I would say Twitter and other social networks were neutral in the sense that they're not trying to autoplay, they're not trying to amplify the polarized content. There's not yet this parasitic algorithm of captivating people's engagement on touch screens. But that came, I think, 2015, 16, when there's a kind of race to the bottom of brainstem, as Tristan Harris would put it, so that all of the platforms kind of shifted in their algorithms. Around the same time, in 2015 also, we were building a compelling alternative to that system, which we call pro-social media rather than anti-social media. So the idea is at the end of that year, we were tapped to join the cabinet as reverse mentors, young people who advise the cabinet ministers to replicate the process that built a consensus after 3 weeks of Occupy. We managed to get a very coherent set of ideas thanks to facilitated focused conversations. And people are like, yeah, this actually works, but we don't want government building be occupied every time we have a national controversy. So how about let's take this online? And so we built a system using open source technology called Polis. And for example, on issues like Uber, instead of fighting the definition of gig economy versus sharing economy, we just ask all passengers and taxi drivers and Uber drivers to go online and resonate with each other's feelings, because we're all experts in our own feelings. If you ask about economy policy, people would hesitate before posting. But if you ask, how do you feel about someone with no professional driver license picking up strangers and so on, people are like, oh, I feel insurance is important. I feel not undercutting existing meters is important, and so on. So people not only see their avatar placed in a cluster of people who feel the same way against people who feel differently, they also see the bridging statements. And because there's only upvote and downvote and no reply button, so there's no room for trolls to grow. So if you have an extreme view, actually it doesn't reach anyone rather than just a very small pocket. But if there's a statement that bridges across longer and longer distance, then it gets amplified. So it's exactly the reverse logic as the polarizing algorithms. And that enabled us, after 3 weeks, to arrive on a set of very coherent demands that became the law on Uber. And so we would continue to build that every year. And after over 100 or so such collaborative conversations, by 2020 already, the approval level came from 9% to over 70%.
Wow. Yeah, the audience was like, well, there are extraordinary ways that these kinds of bridging technologies and other projects you've worked on have been taken up in experiments around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the more recent example was called Engaged California at engaged.ca.gov. So this project has been 2 years in the making. 2 years ago, during the Summit for Democracy, I was invited by Governor Newsom to talk to him and first partner, Jennifer, in their mansion about the need for an infrastructure level citizen participation. Because without the governor or the state government to serve as the underlying infrastructure holder, most of the open source technologies need to be maintained individually by the departments, the ministry, the city councils, and so on. And because of the complexity involved, people only use it for high-stake conversations, and then it kind of falls out of favor until there's another high-stake conversation again. But what we really want is to build a civic muscles almost as a continuous thing, just as in Taiwan, more than 100 collaborative meetings, so that each and every city government or municipalities can just start such conversations with zero transactional cost marginally, right? So the thing, though, is that the first case is very important. In Taiwan, the first case for e-petitioning was around cancer treatments, something that nobody would be against. And so in California, we brainstormed what kind of topics would serve that purpose. And so we kept working on it for a couple of years, and then the wildfire happened. So when it happened, of course, there's a lot of integrated response from the civil society, from the private sector, and the public sector. But the thing here is that this is the great unifier. It is like flowers. People would love to contribute meaningfully, regardless of their parties. There's no pro-wildfire party in California. And so when the governor calls out participation on the Engaged California, maybe there's some local optimizers, but I don't think there's any bad faith actors. And so then we see in a couple of days, more than 6,000 people signing up. And again, using this bridge-making technology, we're now seeing a slate of very workable implementation proposals coming from the people that has more than 85% of approval rates across the different party lines.
That's incredible. And this kind of notion of civic muscle, I think, is so important to drill down on. Research in the United States has shown that one of the best indicators that people will vote in the next election is actually serving on juries. Being in a room deliberating something, something that doesn't have to do with voting, something that doesn't have to do with politics, but being in a room with other citizens, with other people, and hearing from them and having to think through how do we come to a decision together is a powerful flexing of that civic muscle. And there, again, one of the things that I think is inspiring about the work that you're doing, Audrey, is that there are many ways that we can be building and flexing that civic muscle. So it's ready in dark times.
Yes, and I think even in dark times, there are things that people universally or across political aisle consider as urgent issues to tackle. So another example, in Taiwan last year, we faced, well, not wildfire, but something similar. It is the online deepfake fraud that has really taken over the platforms. So last year, if you open Facebook in Taiwan, you see Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA guy, a Taiwanese, looking at you saying that maybe buy some crypto, invest in some stock. And if you click it, you see Jensen Huang actually talking to you, of course, a deepfake voice clone. But many people get captured by that. And because of this, it crowds out the actual useful advertisements from small and medium enterprises. But the problem is that all the previous government measures trying to assign social media liabilities failed because people in Taiwan were the most free in all of Asia, according to Freedom House on online freedom. People don't want the government to look at the content and do anything about content moderation by the state. And so what to do? So what we did is, like a jury, we sent out text messages to 200,000 random numbers around Taiwan. So people who receive this message, again, are asked a simple question: how do you feel about this online fraud and information integrity? Tell us how you feel. And if they want, they can also volunteer to go online to talk to 9 other random people on a video conference. And so thousands signed up. And we made sure that we did sense-making using language models, people's different feelings, to find the uncommon ground and also the balancing options. And then the 450 people randomly drawn, a lotocracy, statistically representative of the Taiwanese society, met in 45 rooms of 10 people each. And the room itself was facilitating. We don't have candlelights, but we do have...
We had a candlelight dinner last night.
Yes, yeah, we do have the room nudging people who are quiet to speak up.
Yes.
And we do have, if you interrupt each other, the room makes sure you only do so for 5 seconds.
And these are virtual rooms.
These are virtual rooms.
Continue.
So these were developed by Stanford in the deliberative poll team. So they had this whole format, but in person, but during pandemic, they moved this online. So we applied this technology with our own sense-making technology. It's also open source called Talk to the City. And so combined together, what it does is that maybe one room of 10 people would say, for example, instead of treating advertisements as real until somebody flags it's scam, how about let's just treat everything as scam, unless Jensen Huang signs off on it to say it's real, it's a good idea. Another room would say, if Facebook doesn't do this, and somebody gets scammed out of $5 million, say, they should be liable for that $5 million instead of fining them. If they're just going to pay the fine if you fine them, but liability, that's what they listen. Another room would say, ByteDance, TikTok, doesn't even have a legal representative. So what if they don't comply? Well, we can gradually slow down connection to their servers until their advertisement all goes to Google or something. And so these rooms basically come up with very proportionate ideas, and using sense-making, we read them out back to the plenary during the break, and basically people hear this package of Overton window and vote on it. So after deliberation, we can show to all the legislators, more than 85% of people agreed on this package of measures, regardless of their occupation, gender, place they live, and so on. And so that was in March. The multi-stakeholder confirmation was in April. We published the draft law by May, and it's taken up by the parliament, fast-tracked like never before. And now this year, if you open Facebook or YouTube in Taiwan, you don't see those fake ads anymore. And so I think what's important here is that we need to upgrade democracy to be at the same speed as the technology that challenge democracy. Indeed, democracy is a social technology that people can improve together.
Well, and it's such an interesting balance because many of us have called for improvement of our online platforms, and Twitter was so important in 2014 to the ways we were thinking about the world, and of course, X is a shell of its former self in terms of its ability to have people self-organize as a platform. And what's great about this particular approach is it works with the resource that people have instead of waiting for regulation, which you get, instead of wishing for changes from the companies. Starting from the bottom up gives you a different kind of power.
Yes, and because all these components, including Polis and the Stanford conversation, although they start proprietary, they very quickly become open source. So Polis is now fully open source with this language model sense-making capabilities. The Harvard ASML, Applied Social Media Lab, is now doing an open source clone of the Stanford stack called Frankly. And so more and more, we're seeing what's called conversation networks. The idea that instead of the most viral dunking going viral online, instead we need to make it such that when it's resonating with a bunch of like 6 people, 10 people, and so on, in a way that speaks across the different aisles, and then we amplify those messages, those resonating moments, and then across different tools. And so I think the main thing that really excites me is that it allows for closing of the loop very easily now. Previously, 10 years ago, it was not possible to go back to everybody who contributed to the Uber conversation and say, it's because of these few words you said that we made this change to our legislation. But now, again, using a language model fully grounded, not hallucinating, we can afford to do that. So people are doing that now in Tokyo, in California, and many other places.
And that takes radical listening, really giving voice to people and letting them see their agency.
Yes, and also I think even more importantly, it gave them a shared peak experience that they can refer to. So because of these tools are open source and the data they have that they contribute to it are open data with meronymic, so partial naming. So if people do not want to reveal like the real name and whistleblowing and so on, they can do so. But we also know that they're not robots, right? So I think some way of having this kind of personhood credentials so that we know their residents, their citizens, and so on, but we don't need to know anything more beyond that. That is important. And because it's guaranteed to be kind of this genuine group speech, they can take fragments of that speech back to their community, and as community organizers, maybe in their families, their schools, and so on, start such conversations. So in a sense, that's kind of a reference implementation, and then you can take snippets of it to have even more bridging conversations in your neighborhood.
I'm going to bring the conversation in just a moment, but I have two hot button questions. So the first one, and this comes back to the conversations we were starting with yesterday. There's a push for governments around the world, including the one here in the UK, to adopt AI for efficiency. What are the challenges and the opportunities of that?
Well, in a sense, if we're talking about deep learning, it can easily go into this making things up mode if you use it outside of its distribution. And so in Taiwan, for example, we're not about like training general purpose or even super intelligent, whatever that means, models, but rather we're about making sure that each vertical industries, each cultural, we have more than 20 national languages, 42 Austronesian indigenous language variants. They all kind of own their own culture, their own language, and they can train smaller, narrow models in a sense of kind of re-narrowing, starting from a general purpose model, making sure that you only keep or distill the parts that you really need to fit for a specific purpose. It not only made auditability much easier, it also made replication much more easy. And so when these models run on the edge, closer to people actually facing the problem, if they see any errors, any issues, they do not need to wait for Anthropic or ChatGPT to retune like half a year into the future, but rather they can do it right now. I've been tuning my model for replying my emails for a couple years now on my laptop. My emails never left. Well, my emails do leave when I hit send, but never left my laptop to some other data
They
center.
never leave my laptop
Right, exactly.
either. They never leave my head.
I know.
I'm sorry if I owe you an email.
Yes. So my email don't leave my laptop except when I read these drafted answers and press send. And I think that shows how much power that this kind of edge metaphor has in everyday life. And indeed, I do not need this general purpose super intelligent model if it's just about replying my email.
That's right. That's right. And so the other hot button question is Taiwan. Eye of the hurricane, right? Calm before the storm, potentially. How hopeful are you?
Well, Polymarket has it at 10% or less chance of annexation. So I think the general mood is, of course, cautionary. But I think because of this common threat, we also achieved something politically was considered impossible even 10 years ago, which is the internal divide of the ROC blue and the Taiwan green factions who disagree even on the flag, name of country and everything else. Right, so they are now banding together. And I think this is really it's like wildfire, it's like a common urgency, it's like typhoon. In the eyes of this hurricane, people do have to build this societal solidarity. And the political people basically need to build those bridges across as wide or even the widest possible realm so that people see each other as potential allies when it comes to the foreign interference and so on. And because of this, last year in our election, even though the PRC did try all sort of AI foreign interference playbooks, they backfired. They did not reach the result. And indeed, all the three presidential candidates reject the Hong Kong model, again, for the first time in our presidential election. So I think the broad listening and bridge-making system did make our society anti-fragile when it comes to those polarization attacks.
Yeah. I think that's something that is a message that is so important in this moment, and I say this from the vantage point of a British American. For too long, we've heard this idea that there is no society. And yet, when you bring people together, they understand on a really fundamental level commonalities and the importance of solidarity.
Yes.
And if one of the things to scale and think about as we go forward from these conversations from this conference is to think about what can we be doing to build that resilience across multiple different places, but also to have, as you say in the book, in terms of transnational views,
exactly
how we're connected.
Yes. So I'm now involved with this plan to buy TikTok, which may or may not go through, but it's called a People's Bid. The idea is to take TikTok and turn it into something that's open source, interoperable on the Fediverse with Blue Sky and also True Social, which is also open source. so the idea is that you do not have to be logged in to TikTok or indeed any platform. You can just view it like emails or podcasts and so on any experience you prefer. But then how to keep a business model going if you cannot trap your users within this addictive loop. Our main idea in the pro-social media paper is that there's a set of algorithms that can let people essentially subscribe and pay for a kind of internal coherence. So like me on my professional side, my family side, my spiritual side, and so on, belong to different communities. But if there's content that weaves them together to find that uncommon ground, I'm really willing to pay for it. And I bet many advertisers with public interest in mind and brand building in mind can do that as well. So I think changing the business model innovation, I think is going to be fundamental. And even it may or may not work in the TikTok case, we're already trying out on the Blue Sky case and hopefully True Social, and to bridge those differences and make a good business case out of it.
And speaking of the business case out of it, I mean, the social science of bridging capital, the social science of bridges in large social networks is that those are the spaces of innovation. So you don't get innovation from the tightly bound clusters. You get when those clusters are bridged with other clusters. And so being able to connect this idea that we can build resilience and think about innovation at the same time, I think is something that's really powerful.
I totally agree.
On that note, I'm bringing people in. I see Lynn in the front is very interested, and so is Julia. Let's get mics to both of them. Do we have a second handheld this morning? Can we get Lynn into the conversation? We'll start with Julia, please.
Thank you very much.
And just tell us your name.
Yes. Hi. So my name is Julia Rune. I'm an assistant professor in Amsterdam and former employee of the center. And I found this conversation super interesting because it points to a lot of the questions we have been grappling with for a long time. Two quick questions. What do we do with topics that are not very salient? I'm thinking, for example, about EU industrial policy. A lot of money is going to be invested in cloud, alternatives to US giants, etc. And there is very little citizen oversight. And whenever you ask people why this is the case, policymakers say, it's too technical. So that's my first question. How do we deal with low salient questions? And my second question is, how do we make governments actually listen to what the citizens say? So I think you present two cases, or actually several cases, a very successful implementation of basically the results of deliberation. But what do we do if participation and deliberation are kind of used as window dressing, which happens quite a lot in the EU, for example? How do we make institutions to actually commit? And yeah, these are my questions. Thank you very much. It was really exciting to share it.
Let's bring Lynn's questions in. Lynn,
Thank you, Gina. So my name is Eliani, and I go by Lynn. I'm from Singapore, so I hear what it's saying about Taiwan. I co-taught a class at Harvard, so it was built by Marshall Gans. He talked a lot about one-on-one interactions. So I'm just very fascinated about what you're saying about bridge making and uncommon ground. But what about what we can do in terms of like in-person meetings and scale? So for example, now I live in DC, and I'm trying to bring people together who have lost their jobs. So 17% of people who lost their jobs voted for Trump. And I think it's an opportune time to also bring people together across the divide. Would you have any tips for us in this room on how we can do that in person at a much smaller scale than what you've been doing? Thank you.
Okay.
So we have salience, listening, and scaling one-to-one. May I see the hands for the next, and we'll take Julia and Bhargav, but we'll answer these questions first. You get the points.
Okay.
Scale,
Yes.
listening, and one-to-ones.
Yes. So, yeah, indeed, if we started the Uber conversation asking about sharing economy policy, we would not go anywhere. And similarly, in our national participation platform, Join, if we talk about marriage equality or LGBTIQ rights, again, we won't get anywhere. Even with the best pro-social media design, there is not a possibility for people to talk about things if they don't epistemologically know that they're talking about the same thing. So instead, we usually talk about one very simple overlap, one very concrete case like overlapping consensus sense as a kind of low-hanging fruit. So one very quick example. In the beginning of the pandemic, January 2020, people were having very different conversations about masks and about the science of mask, which by that time was not at all established. But we already see the polarization happening. One side saying that, because of our SARS experience, only N95 is useful. Everything else is harmful. And another side says it's ventilation, it's aerosol, any mask is harmful. N95 harms the most. But we can't do a national participation on the science of mask, mostly because we don't have time for that. And so in time of urgency, what do? Instead, again, we ask for people's feelings on specific things like what does mask mean to you? And because of that, very quickly, we rolled out this public service announcement, a very cute dog, a Shiba Inu, the Doge dog, that puts her paw to her mouth and says, wear a mask to remind each other to keep your dirty and washed hands from your mouth. So that's the uncommon ground when it comes to feelings. The science can wait, but that is indisputably true. And then when both sides see this and laugh about it, actually they depolarize because at least one bridge has been done. And if I don't wear a mask, you wear a mask, well, you're just reminding me to wash my hands. And we did measure tap water usage, it did increase. So basically just keep finding low-hanging fruits to build smaller uncommon grounds. I think that is for the salience question. And related, I think governments are very willing to do that because it's not trying to step into, in design thinking terms, the development and the delivery of policies. This is just about the discovery of feelings and definition of shared values. So if you focus on the first diamond, I think most government agencies can see this as something worthwhile to invest their time in. And especially if you build it as a digital infrastructure that absorb the initial bootstrap and transaction costs, then they're, I think, seeing this as a risk-reducing move rather than a risk-increasing move. I hope that answered your question. And with Marshall, yes. I've talked with Marshall, and we work very closely with the Constructive Communications Lab in MIT, Deb's team. And I think part of the insight there is that a lot of the ideas that we share in these online spaces can be done offline with what's called assistive intelligence or assistive AI, in the sense that it only helps the facilitator, but it's not in your face when it comes to the participants. So in the lab, there's a lot of tools that helps on the sense making, on the summarization, on finding the right medley to play, to evoke this bridge making feeling and so on. So my suggestion would be look into the cortical tools, which are designed for this kind of in-person settings. And we're now actively trying to build this conversation network protocol so that we can bridge the polis, the frankly on this side, and cortical in-person on the other side, so that we can do this closed loop listening exercises, whether you're a community organizer or whether you're a policy planner. It's kind of the two sides view on the same set of shared sense-making data. Yeah.
We're going to bring Bhargav into the conversation.
Hey, Audrey, big fan. I'm a computer scientist and I've been following your great work for a while. My question may potentially be a bit depressing. I'm 30 years old, so I've grown up largely US, and now I live in the UK. And I've felt both of these countries, decades of austerity and wealth inequality has led to most people just not trusting liberal democracy, or not also trusting the social contract is broken in a sense. In both of these countries, less than 50% of people under 30 voted in major elections. I don't blame people for this because there's a feeling of being let down, like it's all I've known since growing up. And when people have kind of lost trust in this process, it's tough to even get them involved in the first place. I'm also from India, so in that sense, there's a different kind of Asian mentality with respect to participation potentially, but I really empathize with young people feeling hopeless and feeling like democracy doesn't work. There's a bunch of polls which also reflect this. So yeah, I guess I'm curious about how do we win trust with people, younger people especially, to believe that we can actually work together to build new futures? Yeah, thank you very much.
Great.
And let's bring Julia Slupska in.
Hi, hello. I work for Ofcom, which is the UK's online safety regulator. My name is Julia Slupska. And I thought it was, I've read parts of your book, and I thought some of the ideas about how we can use technology to use democracy were really fascinating. But one thing I kept thinking is about how these technologies can be abused as well. So for example, you talk about large language models being used within organizations to spot people who are contributing lots of good ideas, and that this can be a kind of anti-hierarchical measure to sort of counteract organizational hierarchies. But I was thinking about how this could also very well be used to spot people within the organization who are dissenting or unionizing or organizing some kind of trouble. And probably that technology is also being developed. So I was curious what your thoughts are on how we can stop technologies that are being developed from being abused.
You want to take
Okay, great. So 10 years ago in Taiwan, we had a very similar issue with young people's lack of agency. And there's this general learned helplessness sense. Like no matter how large a following you have on social media, no matter how broadcast is your message, it's not going to result in any real change. So I'm definitely with you on that one. I think in Taiwan it worked because the young people did not wait for the elderly people to take matters to our own hands. Even before the Sunflower Movement, we're already seeing in local spaces the people who basically organize the social enterprises, the co-ops, the unions, and so on, taking matter to their own hands, thanks to this kind of organizing digital technology. And because, in a sense, the logic of the Taiwanese civic innovation is that we never wait, for example, for Reddit or Facebook to develop the features we need. We insist on open source. So the Taiwanese equivalent of Reddit, the PTT, has been open source for 25 years and entirely governed by students, clubs in universities, and so on. So because there is a tendency for people in the graduate school and universities to see people who are not even 18, the high schoolers, as potential system operators, fellow facilitators, admins, and so on. So the youth network kind of supported itself until a day where, like the Sunflower Movement and other social movements, where there's a common urgency, and then they stepped into the facilitator role, the broadcaster role, the translator role, and so on, so that people can then see that, oh, it is time to invite them as reverse mentors. And so we changed our curriculums almost immediately afterward, which took effect in 2019. We switched from what's called literacy curriculum to what's called competency platform. Literacy is when you consume, and competence is when you contribute. And so by measuring air and water and noise levels, pollution levels, by fact-checking the 3 presidential candidates as they're having a debate in real time, and so on, we empower the 15-year-olds in Taiwan so that a couple of years ago, according to ICCS, they're now the top of the world when it comes to OECD equivalents, when it comes to the agency they feel that they can set an agenda for the society even before they turn 18. So I think focusing on the intergenerational solidarity between the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, and the 15-year-olds, I think that is very important, and indeed is what carried us through the very dark, 8 years before the Sunflower Movement. I hope that answered that question. And to the question about the ideas of making sure that a government can take this kind of technologies into account? Well, I think there's roughly speaking two ways. If you're a regulator, especially in a regulator context, I think if we're making sure that the norms that people build are viable alternatives to existing regulations, then you don't need to wait for the regulations to actually pass by the parliaments and so on in order for people to point to this. So Blue Sky is a very recent example. It demonstrated that interoperability can work across the different incentive economically, so that people build on the race to the top when it comes to quality instead of to the bottom of the brand stem. And then the regulators can kind of follow through when we have something concrete to point to. So in a sense, it always relies on an outside game of social innovators and social entrepreneurs, and then the people on the inside, the reformers and so on, can refer to that as an example.
Fantastic. I'm going to give John the last question. John.
Thank you. I like conversations like this because they make me feel uncomfortable. When we were setting up the center in 2020, the first question was, what do we call it? And we decided that it was going to be the Center for Technology and Democracy. And over the years, I've become increasingly uneasy about that. If I had to do it again, I would say it should be the Center for Democracy and Technology. Ah. And what I really like about your work is the way in which you embody that sort of paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. But let me give you an example, because I think implicit in the title we have is an acceptance of a deterministic model, which is technology does this stuff, and society's job, democracy's job, is to pick up the pieces. Right? That's the implicit, in a sense, mindset within this.
Like chasing technology.
Yeah, technology. No, and I keep thinking about this. So just a simple example. I'm an engineer, and most of the values, technical values embodied in this technology are those of engineers. And if there's one thing engineers are absolutely obsessed with is efficiency. And in all kinds of ways, that's great. But if you think of a really important central democratic institution, which is our idea of the rule of law, okay? And in relation to criminal justice, it would be really efficient if we had a criminal justice system which simply would put people in jail on the say-so of the chief of police. But we don't do that. Mm. Our criminal justice system is hideously inefficient. Some of that is to do with incompetence, but at the core of it is the idea that everybody is entitled to the presumption of innocence before they get convicted. Mm-hmm. That's very inefficient. It's slow and it's deliberative, but it is absolutely core value. Mm-hmm. In other words, sometimes the requirements of democracy are radically at odds with the requirements of technology. And what's refreshing about your work is you're kind of shifting that paradigm the other way around. Mm-hmm. Is that
and
right?
That's John Naughton, the co-founder of the Minderoo Center for Technology and Democracy.
Yes.
Audrey.
Yes. So continuing on the previous question, I think, of course, there are abuses that people take, like language models, and like commit hideous crimes in the name of efficiency, of course. And it's not just language models, but rather any kind of automated technology. And I think the framing I want to shift, like the Blue Sky example, is that technology as assistive technologies, almost like eyeglasses, like assistive technologies that enhance human dignity. Instead of replacing each other's connection, it enhances the resolution of our connection. Because one can also think about the polis-like or cortical-like technology to be implemented as individual-to-individual surveys, maybe chatbots. I talk to my avatar, you talk to your avatar, our avatar talk to each other, and very efficiently reach some sort of consensus. It's like going to the gym and see the robot lifting the weights. Very impressive. but the civic muscle doesn't grow at all, right this way. And in a sense, if you talk about the effectiveness of building civic muscles, then this way, the deliberative way, is obviously more efficient. So it depends on whether you analyze from the efficiency of like how quickly can you get to a decision to make somebody go to jail, or whether it is making sure that criminal justice is well understood by the population. And we always using the assistive frame built for this one instead of that one.
The book is Plurality, the future of collaborative technology and democracy. Please join me in thanking Audrey.